Welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe, the podcast series for beginner web developers and general web enthusiasts. Now, introducing your show hosts, Michael Budd, Fraser Hart, Lewis Caines, and Ed Mann.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Three Devs and a Maybe. My name's Ed Mann, and today we are joined by the very busy Michael Budd. How you doing, Mickey?
I thought you were going to go with handsome. But,
handsome. Okay, the very handsomely busy Michael Budd.
Stop it.
How you doing, dude?
I'm good. Like you say, I am not very handsome,
think you're really
but
busy.
very busy.
I think you're just busy for me. You're like, oh yeah, Ed, I'm sorry, I'm really busy. And then it's like everyone else is like, guys, I've got nothing else to do. I'm bored.
Just whenever you want to come round, oh, I'm sorry, man.
Sorry, man. Yeah, I'm out at the moment.
Doing my hair.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm doing my
Lack of.
Absolutely, and it's like, oh, but your car's in the drive, Mickey, and you're not in. It's like, yeah, man,
no
sorry,
hair.
and the kids screaming, and everything, and exactly, you're doing your
Yeah.
hair. Oh,
Yeah.
dear. So what's been going on, man? What's going on in the life of Mickey at the moment?
So pretty much, I'm full time, pretty much working on this project, this web stats project. So, which I think I've well covered in the podcast. So I won't bang on about that, but just really, I don't know about you, but like, we get close to the deadline, it gets more stressful.
I think, well, the code base is obviously coming bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's a bigger project to manage and expectations now and everything like that.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know. I think I heard something on the news the other day. It was like saying like how your productivity goes down when you're stressed, and that's horrible, isn't it? Because that's just like a horrible.
The one time you need it.
Yeah, exactly. But no. To be fair, I mean, I'm running close to deadlines now, but the client's been really understanding, and he's really happy with the product. And one of the nice things I would say about this whole experience is like one thing I could recommend to other people, like freelancers and stuff, if you're doing a large project, like the kind of like bi-monthly demos. They're just really, really good. Like, okay, you might lose like an hour out of your working week, but it just makes sure that you don't just deliver a product at the end of it, which is, completely not what they expected or whatever. And you can put in those little changes as long as the client's not, completely rewriting the spec. But it's just, for me, I really like that. I like that kind of feedback regularly rather than at the end,
So I mean, it's interesting you say that, because obviously that then shortens I would say maybe even more you could probably do, couldn't you? Like, I mean, within reason, because obviously, you need, if the client is very busy or there's many, people that combine to be the client, then obviously you have to orchestrate and get them all together. But like you say, those short feedback cycles really help you, because I think, fundamentally, I think there's two things actually, and I think I know from personal experience where I kind of come from these two things is, one, you're really scared of actually asking the clients for their feedback because you're scared that they're going to say it's rubbish or it's wrong and you're going to have to do it all again. So you kind of either push it back and you're saying, no, I'm not going to ask them because I'm on the right track. I know I've solved it in my way, even though it may not be the right solution. It's like, oh, but this is such a good solution to a problem that may not even be the right problem and things like that. So you kind of push it away and you kind of subconsciously think, no, I'm not going to ask them and stuff until the end because you don't want to be wrong.
That's very true. It's kind of like head in the sand approach.
That's it, because you want to be right and, you're happily on your way. But there should be the other side of that. Flipping that over is really what you should be doing, is you should be constantly getting feedback, because if you get feedback at a good time, you have enough time to swerve and, to go and change directions and things like that. And, big changes aren't going to be around because you're just going to end up, obviously, it's going to be short iterations where you're like, okay, now I need to change this. That's fine. Because it's only been, it goes from being like maybe a day's work, so you say, okay, now I only have to change a day's work as opposed to a month's work or something like that, because you've, obviously gone down the wrong path. So I do think, as you say, good conversation and dialogue with the client is a must.
Definitely. And I think the other side of that is that, if you are then running late, at least the client's knowing exactly what you're doing. He knows you're not just twiddling your thumbs. And he's like, well, do you know what? I did ask you to change those things, and I appreciate they take extra time. And, I'm not like an agile disciple or anything like that. I'm still waiting to read the book on agile, so to speak. But there are certainly things like out of that people have told me about that really make sense, and that kind of constant kind of feedback that
the
just
feedback
really makes
loop has
sense
to be short. I mean, when it goes down on the code level with TDD and things like that, where you're getting constant test feedback and things like that, it needs to go up to the level or bubble up to, your client base and what you do with the client, and how you interact with them. Because, gone are the days of you just going off, getting this spec and going off for a month and then coming back, because people have realized how poor that is. Whether you go to the spec completely and it's right at that time, the spec changes throughout the time. Your client, I'm sure there's been decisions where the client had thought of doing that. You've shown them maybe part of the solution, a prototype of how that works, and they're like, actually, I don't really want that, and that saves you so much valuable time, as opposed to, maybe what you would have done is spent a month polishing this feature off just for them to go, nah, that wasn't really what we wanted, and you have to do another month. And obviously, if you're trying to con the money out of your client, that's great. But to actually get a good client relationship is to be, working with them and saying, okay, well, we'll try this and see how it goes and things like that. So, no, I'm completely on board with what you're saying.
That's it. So, really, I've been working on that. And then, apart from that, I've been working on my pizza oven. So,
completely diverse. And how's the feedback loop going in that?
Well, the project manager's very happy with it. Well, actually, it looks diabolical. But I'm really, really happy with it. And all joking aside, I think having a side project away from code, whatever you want to do, whether it's like clay pigeon shooting or whatever, but just having something apart from that is really healthy.
I would love to do clay pigeon shooting. Okay, that would be a cool thing. That would be a good hobby to have.
But the pizza oven has been my side really, and I reckon about 2 weeks I'll be cooking that first pizza. Very nice. So,
I expect pictures, video. And I don't expect it to fall down. I know you've been talking off air to me about how it's been going and stuff. And there's a big, what is it, the big decision? Not big decision, but it's the big kind of part of it now is that you're going to essentially try and make sure it stands up on its own or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I just built the dome on top of the base that I've built, and that's like a mix of clay and sand. Well, I think they call it fire cob. And basically, there'll be a test. I'll have to scoop out all the sand from underneath that's supporting it, and hope that it stands up, and B, that when the fire goes, it doesn't destroy everything. So I'm fairly optimistic, but it's just been so much fun just learning how to do it, and the different material types, and something that's so foreign to me, something I've not done before. It's just really cool to do. So
that's awesome. And how have you been kind of learning about that? Has that been YouTube videos and articles online or?
I know we've said it 1,000 times, but it's just YouTube is just so good. I mean, I must have watched maybe 100 different YouTube videos on people, and it just varies from complete cowboys to really real professionals. But you can usually learn something from all of them. The cowboys, you learn. You think, I'm not going to do
tricks. That. Yeah, exactly. You learn the knots to do, or maybe tips and tricks of how to get things cheaply done. As opposed to maybe
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
and
awesome.
there already are parallels with, craftsmanship is craftsmanship, right? If it's code or building a pizza oven, but if you skimp on materials, then it's going to go wrong. If you cut corners, it's probably going to fall down. It's really good fun, really good fun. I recommend it to anyone who's got a spare patch in the garden, and what's better than cooking your own pizza on your own pizza oven.
I like that. Well, I think we've just found the name of the podcast episode. Let's build a pizza oven together.
Let's build a pizza oven.
Let's build a pizza oven. I think it's not vague at all. It's exactly what this podcast is about: building pizza ovens.
But anyway, what have you been up to?
Unfortunately, I haven't been playing pigeon shooting, and I haven't been building pizza ovens, so I haven't really been living. You sound like you've
just been busy injuring yourself.
Oh yeah, well that's true. That's on the repair. Yeah, I decided went on a holiday for a week or so away to Wales, in Saundersfoot and Tenby Way. Really nice, really beautiful. I know you recommended it to me when I said about it. You were just like, "Oh, absolutely great, good choice," and all that. And it was with Amy's my girlfriend's family and stuff, and it was awesome. And people say I'm accident prone. Now, I don't believe them, but there is a growing kind of evidence to support this claim. So obviously a couple of years ago I face planted it on New Year's, which was always a great thing. And then at the end I was doing great on this holiday. It was a walking holiday, dog holiday. So, we go on long walks. We walk around and there's beautiful beaches, and it was such good weather for Wales, completely crazy. So the last day I'm walking on this little rock pool that I've done probably 3 or 4 times before, and I just roll my ankle. I come down funny on it, And you know when you get that feeling, you roll it, and I've rolled my ankle quite a few times playing basketball, and they typically blow up like crazy when they swell. And I rolled it, and I just heard the noise, and I'm like, oh crap, I hope I haven't broken it. Well, personally, actually, I was thinking, crap, I hope I haven't sprained it, because sprains actually take longer than breaks, which is one of the craziest things. Yeah, it's really crazy. Sometimes it's better. I mean, obviously me being a sportsman and all that, with my rock pool climbing, I want to carry on doing that. So yeah, if I was thinking, I hope that it's just a break, because it's quicker to heal than a sprain. But yeah, so obviously that happens, and I'm like, ouch. That hurts quite a bit, and I did everything wrong. So obviously it was the last day, so we're coming back. So it's a 4-hour journey back from Wales back to Kent, and I've got it all the way down, no ice or anything like that. So it's obviously blown up quite a bit. And Amy's like, I think we should go to A&E. So we went to A&E, had an X-ray and stuff, and I'd sprained it bad. Really quite bad sprain, actually. Probably one of the worst I've had. And yeah, I'd also chipped off a bit of bone and stuff, so I was in a lovely not cast, but kind of a boot thing for a week last week. But obviously working from home, it doesn't really affect it. It's quite nice that I was still, essentially I could do the job perfectly, because I could just have my foot up for the whole week. But yeah, so fortunately it was the end of the holiday. Unfortunately it had to happen, but yeah, now this kind of idea that Ed is accident prone has become a thing. So I'm kind of scared of that. I don't like this idea of being accident prone, but it does seem to be happening.
I was going to say, rolling your ankle is really horrible.
It's just the sick feeling. It's like everyone's saying, are you okay? And I'm like, I'll be okay once this sick feeling goes. But it's at the moment I just want to be on my own. It's like, ow, ow, ow. I think it's the shock as well. I think it's where your body goes into a state of shock, doesn't it? And it's like, what has gone on? What have you done? And it's essentially saying, look, you sit down and do nothing for a while. I'm going to make you feel sick. So we can see what's, kind of damages. But it's all fine now. Well, I say it's all fine now. It's slowly progressing. But, the more I ice it. Did the rice thing, as you say. The rest. Yeah. Was it rest, ice, compression, and elevation? Yeah, did all that. And now I've got some lovely exercises from the physio to do, but I should be all on the mend. And I can't blame alcohol this time. That's the annoying thing. Obviously with the face plant, it was all alcohol's fault. Now it's just genuinely Ed's fault.
All Ed. All
Ed, a solid Ed experience. But within that time though, I've been able to kind of, really like lunchtimes now, I used to be able to go out and walks and things. At the moment, last week I wasn't able to do that, so I kind of mixed it up between carrying on reading a book that I was reading throughout holiday time to do with Clojure. Clojure Applied. I'll put in the show notes. It was a really interesting podcast. It's about Clojure, and it's a Clojure Applied is a book from Pragmatic Programmers, and it kind of discusses using Clojure in the real world. Because all these languages are great, and you can get really good contrived examples, and you're like, this is beautiful. But actually getting a programming language, I found, and actually using it in real life. I mean, this is where you always come back down to PHP or something like that, because you've had experience on it. It's like, oh yeah, it's great, I've got this knowledge of another language, but I've got my tried and true. I know exactly what's going on in PHP, and it's got all the the infrastructure around it. So this book kind of goes into a bit of a dive about what not really about Clojure. You should actually have a good knowledge of Clojure as it stands, but it goes into more kind of advanced topics within Clojure. Talks about like reducers and things like that, and transducers. Sorry, and so it goes into that, and then it discusses things such as how you're going to build a domain out of it using their data types and stuff, and it's really interesting. So I'm about 3/4 of the way through that, and that's been a really interesting read. But I've been also juggling that with obviously this is as the podcast is. I've been releasing a couple of podcast episodes. So I've been able to. I spoke to Jonathan Clean. He messaged us a while back and was able to release an application performance episode, which was really interesting. And I've also then spoken to. I say in this obviously no one knows about this yet. Obviously you will know about this because they've already been released by the time this comes out. And then also I spoke to. Joe Watkins about PHP 7.1 and all that interesting stuff. But yeah, I mean, that kind of has been my kind of away from, the world of, kind of work programming. How about you? You been doing much outside of work programming?
Well, I guess the only other thing I've been working on really is obviously my master's is still sort of like hanging over my head, and
like a dark cloud.
Yeah, do you know, it's really strange because
you've only got. What have you got? You've only got one. You've got the final year project to do, haven't you? You've done everything else. Yeah. Yeah,
I honestly thought the first 2 years would be the hardest, which they sort of were. Don't get me wrong, but with those, because I kind of like was told this is what you must do, you must solve this problem. Kind of having those shackles it actually helped you get work done. Whereas now, I was like, because I got to choose my final project, and because I've obsessed over certain things, I've not done as much as I really hoped. And obviously, this whole transition to freelance, I need to really
distraction.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to speak to probably one of my big clients at the end of this project to say, look, I actually want a day a week to learn.
Yeah.
Because I think, well,
you're freelance. You have this, you have reign over what you do, and obviously you know and feel that will benefit you, and I think quite rightly so.
Yeah, and I think what it will do is, like all these companies say, oh, we can't afford to give, people time to learn. Well, I think, well, if I could do it, then there's no organisation who can't. Do you know what I mean? There's no excuses. So
it's interesting. It's interesting you say about like kind of constraints and stuff, because that's very much what designers, and artists feel. It's very hard just to have no constraints, have free reign over everything. And I think that's the same with something like what you're dealing with, where you've got unlimited amount of kind of ideas to what you want to do. There's no you have to do it within these confined constraints. I mean, all these courseworks and stuff provide you with constraints that you then have to use, and you can explore and kind of investigate. So maybe and I know that this works quite well for designers, is actually to employ kind of some fake constraints, like self constraints on you, where like, okay, well, it has to be within this domain, this idea, and I have to use this language, and I have to use these concepts and things. And I know you've been messing around with the idea of like, obviously you're going to use PHP, and then you want to maybe think about kind of using a C extension under the hood that's someone else has written, and just providing plumbing between those and stuff. And maybe that's a great idea, saying that these are the constraints that I have to work in, as opposed to saying, oh no, actually screw this, I'm not going to use PHP now, I'm going to go to a whole different stack and use that. And I think that's the hard thing, as you say, is that having constraints does help design, and I do feel that in a lot of mediums actually it benefits to have these constraints. Yeah,
that's right. I hadn't really thought that through until we started speaking about it, but you're absolutely right. It's strange, isn't it, that taking away the shackles has actually kind of slowed me down more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely bipolar, isn't it, of what you feel is going to be, because you feel, okay, I'm going to be able to get on with loads of stuff because it'll be everything that I want to do, and you're like, actually, crap, there's so much I want to do, or there's so little. I mean, probably in your case, there's definitely so much you would like to do, and then but you don't have the focus to be able to, constrain on certain ideas and certain technologies and stuff. So no, I can feel for you. I definitely understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
But other than that, not as much as I want. Also, I've been reading the Sam Newman book, but
hoping to get him on soon. Well, I say soon. I mean, we're hoping, maybe we can actually, discuss with him, because I know you've really enjoyed reading his book.
Yeah, I think the book's really, really good, and I know you say you think he's got his own podcast, right? So he's probably a busy man, but if we could get him on, that'd be really interesting, because I really do like some of the concepts he talks about, and he's obviously got a lot of experience, and he's worked on some very big projects as well, which is very interesting.
I think he works with Martin Fowler as well. I think they both work at the company. Yeah, so obviously they've got a lot of decent knowledge behind them at that company.
Yeah, that's not a bad guy to be working with, is it? Really?
Not at all.
So, but yeah, you got a few things.
I have actually, yeah. So actually, first things first. Actually, with work-related stuff, I'm going to do another plug for Screen Hero. I use it on a pretty much day-to-day basis, and ever since Slack kind of bought them out, I've been constantly worried, thinking, look, I just want Screen Hero. I will happily pay for Screen Hero on its own. I don't want the whole Slack stuff. But they seem to have just left it to work, and there's been no updates, no dot releases, and it just seems to kind of work still, and it's still the best available pair programming. So essentially, it's like remote desktop, but it's very much catered towards the developer, sorry. So, being able to pair program remotely and things like that. And this week has been another case where I've been able to pair program on a little feature that we're working on. And just the value of it is just immense, being able to do this. I mean, it is better than being in person, because you both get, to be able to focus on your own screen with a keyboard in front of you, and you're not kind of chopping and changing, drivers based on moving the keyboard. And you're able then to still do the dialogue and everything. As long as you've got a good connection, you're fine. And it's very good at dealing with that. I mean, typically, the things of like Skype, desktop, remote desktops, and all these kind of things, and RDP, you get this lag and all that, and it does have that horrible feeling. But with Screen Hero, it doesn't, and it's awesome. And I think it uses WebRTC under the hood and stuff like that, which is kind of its secret sauce, which is awesome.
Right.
But anyway, so moving on from Screen Hero to something completely different, is our friend Postgres. You love Postgres. Well, I love Postgres. You are learning to love Postgres, slowly but surely. I know that a couple of episodes back, actually, you kind of spoke a little bit about Postgres, and not, kind of mentioning like kind of how you felt that Postgres was maybe a little harder to set up and kind of manage than MySQL. And and it was interesting because like I when I first heard that, I was like, I don't know, and I thought actually, yeah, you're right. I mean, vacuuming and things like that can seem a little bit harder. You're like, oh, but you don't have to deal with that in MySQL. And I'm thinking, well, why is that? Why exactly is that? And doing the talk with on Full Stack Radio with Edd and Mick, about kind of MySQL and the MyISAMs and things like that, and actually then also moving on to the application performance stuff where I talked about forks of MySQL and performance things and stuff using InnoDB and all that. I was kind of thinking, well, why is this then? What is the thing? And it all revolves around the idea of looking after your data. So looking after your data is the most important thing a database should do. I should expect it to, when I store it, and it should look after it, and it shouldn't be corrupted. In the days of MyISAM, you would get really good speed boosts and you'd get really good performance, but you wouldn't get the reliability that it will actually stay that way, and it could just corrupt your data at any moment. So that was a price you're paying. So everyone should be using InnoDB now and things like that. But along with that comes a couple of caveats. So with multi-version concurrency control, MVCC, that is pretty much the underlying technology behind both InnoDB and the Postgres database store. That's it. That allows you to, at different times, I'm able to update and read and write at the same time, and there'll be no conflicts. So in the MyISAM days, typically what would happen is if I was doing a write to a table, it would lock the whole table, so no one else could read it until I've done. And that used a locking mechanism. But obviously in today's age, we do a lot of reads and we do not as many writes, but you shouldn't, when I'm writing, I shouldn't be expected it to, the read to lock. I mean, it can show on big performance hits if you're doing those type of things. You may not feel that, but actually if you start looking at your characteristics of how you use your application, you'll be like, oh crap, it is actually really bad. So the idea of multi-version concurrency control is, and it comes actually, Clojure use this within their database, within their management of concurrency. It's a really interesting topic there. But, so essentially what it does is you can think of it as, what you do is you never delete anything and you always append. So it's an append-only list, essentially, or append-only list, you can kind of think of it as, and it's continuous blocks. So what will happen is, say I've inserted a couple of records, and each one of those records actually has a transaction ID, has a read time, timestamp or a write timestamp of when it was written. And maybe a transaction ID of what transaction typically let's think about it as a transaction ID. So, maybe I insert and it's transaction ID 1. So I've inserted a user. Now, if I go into transaction 2, I'm able to read that user. So, I get a new transaction up because every statement, whether it's in a block or on its own, can be considered as a single transaction. So I select and I go, give me the users. Okay, brilliant. I've got that user. Okay. Well, what happens now if I say and so I then have another one. So I have 2 going on. So I create 2 simultaneous transactions, 4 and 5. 4 comes along and says, actually, I would like to insert something. And then 5 comes along and I says, I want to read something. They're both happening at the same time. Now, if you didn't have MVCC and you didn't have locking, you could have this intermittent state where it knows a little bit about the fact that there's another a user inserted, and it doesn't, and it's awful. So what happens is, it essentially does an isolation. So you currently have transactions 4 and 5, but the 5 will select and it will go, actually, okay, what I need to do is I'm only going to look at everything from 3. That's the most recent one that's completed, so been committed. So it's going to get that, the initial only with 1 user in. I insert, it then inserts it. It bumps up the ID of that current version. Updating is quite similar, where what updating does is, say if I update a record, and say I'm still selecting a record, if I update the record, if I select the record first, it's going to get the transaction ID, of the currently most up-to-date one for that record. If I do an update, it then will not remove and replace that version. Instead, it will add a new version and say that the most recent one, obviously, is that one. So I think I've explained that. What I'm hoping to do is get Bruce on, who's did the screencast that I've been raving about, and I know you actually mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, where he's been talking about Postgres and how this all works internally. But essentially, what it is it allows you to completely, keep updating the database, write to the database, whilst also reading from the database. And this is where you get the whole idea of I may have the count. So in InnoDB and in Postgres, you have this idea of there's a round account, a certain amount of rows. And that's because you've started a transaction. And I don't know after that transaction if you're going to quickly do an insert. So I don't know exactly what's happening. So that's how, I've got a transaction that open. I've got this transaction ID. I'm now looking at that snapshot in time.
So that's why it's always an estimate and
that's
not
it,
a...
because it can't guarantee, because it doesn't know after the fact if there's a transaction immediately after it that's going to be inserted, saying, who have just happened maybe before it, but hasn't yet committed. So it
sounds quite similar going back, but when I did my Java, the concurrency and parallelism module was like very similar with the way that arrays, like concurrent arrays worked, where like you never kind of deleted an item from an array, or you would like tag like one of the items as maybe deleted or something, but it would never actually go.
That's exactly it. So this is where you get into the situation. So I've now constantly appending to this list, and it's great because I can always, got consistency enough because, it's like I'm able to read. I mean, there's the cases of like isolation, or say conflict, where maybe I'm trying to write something that has already got something written before. So say if I'm doing 2 writes on the same thing. Now, what will happen is that first write and the second write are happening. It realizes, there's ways of working out with the timestamp. You're both trying to write to the same thing. We need to think, let me commit the first one first, so update to that first, and then run the second one again. So it has to, kind of work through. And it's interesting, actually, because there's a couple of analogies that the Wikipedia article used, and it's like thinking of it, if you're standing in line at a store, and you cannot complete your checkout until those in front of you have completed theirs. So you can't complete yours unless these ones have been completed. And if you try to cut in to check out early, you go back to you go back to the back of the line. So this is essentially that thing where, things before it have to commit before I run my own thing, because I need to know I've got the most up-to-date version. I can't just, because what will happen is, it's the whole thing of I insert, you insert, and we've got this, unexpected outcome. But like you said, you've tagged them as deleted. So what do you have? I mean, you've got this append only thing, continuous blocks. You're constantly, anytime you insert, you're adding, anytime you're updating, you're adding, and you're just tagging, essentially you've got like the most recent tags, that you care about, saying these are fine, and you're just saying, no, these are old now. This is where vacuum comes in, because you can't, you don't have an infinite data store space. So vacuum comes along, and what it does is it cleans out all the others.
That's the cleanup operation.
That's exactly it. So it has to clean up the old ones because, it does need up to a case, maybe within the time frame of having all these transactions that you have open at that time, it needs to maintain all those versions. But anything before that, it doesn't care about. It doesn't really care about that at all. So it has to run this vacuum, which then goes about and then obviously, cleans it up, defragments essentially, defragments, each of the records to be in line and things like that. So that's why you have to do the vacuum process within the MVCC model in Postgres.
But you know what my next question is going to be, right?
Absolutely. Why do you not have to do it in MySQL?
That. But also I was going to say, why is it not an automated process in Postgres? Because when I was looking at this and I was looking at Stack Overflow, people were like, you can write your own script just to automate it every 500 writes or something. I was like, that's crazy. Like, I don't want to do that.
So I mean, the thing is there is a daemon. There's a vacuum daemon that does run,
right?
And the trouble is, it's quite performant. Like on certain tables, particularly hot tables, which get a lot of updates and inserts, you're gonna, if you leave it for a long time, you're gonna have a lot of cleanup to do. This is where you kind of treat like, tables as queues and things like that. And kind of I've been reading up, and like the recommended thing there is to really, as you say, like every so many writes, you do just quickly run vacuum and you don't let it get to a stage where it's completely, unusable. So maybe like every 30 seconds you're running vacuum just because you know that you're going to get this hit. There is a daemon already set up, but you should, and you do have to bear in mind that, doing a vacuum can be costly if you've got a very big data set. Because, you have to update the indexes and you're doing all this stuff again.
The reason that it's not kind of like automated out of the box in is that they're literally leaving that to you to say, look, we'll let you decide how often you want to do it.
So it is.
You just have it there.
It is automated, but it's not probably the settings you want, or you have to kind of think about it. And obviously when you're doing your indexing and stuff, you may do a vacuum analyze and things like these and all that, to be able to set it up properly and stuff. But that's the reason why you have to do a vacuum, is that, you get this amazing VCC, you get this idea of being able to read write at the same time, but it doesn't come without a cost in that, you have to vacuum up old stuff. And, you have to bear that in mind. So obviously then the question I had was, why did we never have to do this in MySQL? And this is where you came into my head, where you're saying, but you have to do vacuuming and stuff, all this kind of stuff. You have to do vacuuming and all this rubbish, in Postgres. Why do you have to not do it in MySQL? And it turns out, so it does do MVCC, but I was looking through it, and I'll put it in the Stack I'll put it in the show notes, but it's a Stack article exactly on this topic. And essentially, it's the way that it does it. So I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't really understand it, and I'll just be doing a discredit for it. But essentially, what it's saying is that the short version is InnoDB uses rollback logs, which are more like Oracle's design. Only the most recent version of the row is kept on the main table. It must manage log purging and asynchronous delayed operations with a related function, to Postgres. So it has a better way of dealing with it, so you don't have to do it as much, but you still eventually have to do vacuuming, and that's when you do, I can't remember exactly what it is, but optimized table, which essentially does that. So I think it deals with it in more performant, or maybe, I could be completely wrong, and this is where it's great, where I'm hoping Bruce can tell me this, where maybe they're doing exactly the same thing. But what I get is that essentially that Postgres has a different way, and uses a different way to what Oracle and MySQL use, and both have their benefits, and then both have their cons, obviously, because maybe you have to do vacuuming more on Postgres.
It sounds really bad, but back in the day, I remember now seeing the optimize button in PHPMyAdmin. I used to click it now and again, think, I wonder what that does. And then you had no idea what it did. But I know.
Well, this is the interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, it's one of those things where it is, you feel, oh God, this must be really hard to understand, but it really makes sense. It's like, I'm going to have to keep versions of these around until these transactions are done. I've got a couple of, kind of logical conditions based, to guard against the fact of having conflicts. And I have to do a cleanup after the fact because you get nothing for free in the world, So, I mean, this is the beautiful thing. So that's my kind of discussion about Postgres and MySQL and why that. And as I say, I was thinking completely of you when I thought, why is DB not having to do this? But it does turn out it does have to do this, but maybe just not at the same rate.
I'll tell you what. Sorry, slightly segueing, but obviously I have listened to your episode with Adam Watham, Honest, but I actually will get round to doing it. Sorry, but a good podcast sometime would be looking at indexing again, especially like indexing on multiple columns.
Yep.
Because that's not something really I'd really considered until this project. But
that's it, composite keys and things like that, and composite indexes and the benefits of them and stuff. And actually, again, this is where hopefully we get Bruce on. I emailed him. He said he's up for doing it sometime next month, a podcast, and he has great talks on indexing and how the query planner works. I do feel, and again, it's like with Git, until you actually understand what Git's doing under the hood, to a concept, to a degree. Like, you don't have to know each individual, actually implementation details. You just need to understand the high level problem it's solving and how it solves it. You get the insight. Like, I'm starting to understand more now how relational databases work, and how indexing works and why it picks certain things, and then that makes you allowed to optimize queries better. So absolutely, we'll definitely try and pick his brain about those things. And one thing actually, sorry, with work related stuff, and this is where, again, there was another thing you discussed, where what is a win of Postgres, and one of them was data types to you, and that was my thing as well when I was talking to Adam, was like, well, data types, it's a programmer's database, it's a dev database, we love it because of the types, and actually types is going to be a flow throughout this whole the rest of the podcast, I think. But one thing I'm doing at the moment is I'm having to store, so the whole idea of this concept of offers, and offers have an expires at, so the offer expires. And once you accepted the offer, the actual offer, you've accepted expires at a certain date. So within a certain time. So, you have an expired date, which is a date timestamp, which is fine, awesome. It expires, next month at a certain time. And then but the idea is that once you accept it, you then have another thing, which is, say, 30 days after accepting, these will expire as well. So how would you store that? Now, in the beginning, I stored it as kind of my MySQL brain, where I'm like, okay, I'll use it as an int. I'll have days. So I'll say, like, given credit is valid for days, or something. So once it's given, it's valid for these days. And, I'm having to specify, good naming convention there was, I only had it as just given credit valid for. And I'm like, well, it's an integer. It gives me no concept of how many days, like what is it? Could it be seconds, minutes, whatever, is it days, months? So, it had to put days within the actual variable name, or within the column name, sorry. So what I was brought on to was the data type interval. So there's actually a interval data type within Postgres. And what this allows you to do is specify just an interval, which is, I want 30 days, and it stores 30 days as an interval. So I can explicitly say, here's an interval. I know, looking at this table, that this stores this, given valid for is an interval. Oh, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be days. I mean, it's only because I'm restricting it to the fact that I want the interval to be days, but it could be anything. It could be seconds, it could be years, it doesn't really matter. But it's efficiently storing an interval, which allows me then to easily be able to calculate within SQL if I want to, or just, bring it out into PHP and do it that way. So again, it's another win where data types have so much value because you can easily see without having to, kind of hack into the name of it, the fact that it's days, and store it as an int. I was looking at MySQL kind of solutions to this, and the only one that they really came up with is the fact that you can use time as an option, but time as the restriction that you can only have. It's like something like less than 838 hours. So you could have the time difference between two things. But this interval is really clear. It's an interval. It can be a day, it can be months, it can be years, it can be centuries, but it's an interval as opposed to being a date time or just a bog standard int.
So just want to be the stupid guy here, as always, but because it sounds like what you're talking about now could be really useful to me in the next couple of weeks, because one of the things that I will be doing is having a member system where they sign up, they get 1 month's free trial, and I want to say obviously after that 1 month start doing a load of stuff. So could I use that interval data type for that exact purpose, and would that make my life easier than just saying created at minus current date?
I would say actually for you there, created at is probably more valuable.
Okay.
I would say if you had so the way that we've kind of worked it out is because we have this idea of storing offers. So offers can vary in kind of interval, kind of period. So this offer is valid when the given credit from this offer is valid for 30 days. So we need to be able to store the fact of 30 days as a concept, as opposed to a date timestamp. Because we don't know when we're actually starting that. That actual time from. We have no gauge on that. We don't know whether it's going to be when we, because once we say we've sent the offer, it may be a couple of days until they actually accept the offer. So within the within the time frame until it expires, we need to vary the fact of when actually when they actually get their credit gets expired. Sorry. So yeah, in that case, I still would use date timestamps, and the time interval stuff within and kind of working out the stuff in Postgres is great. So you're going to love it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, I know PHP, if you do with two date time objects, and you do minus on the other, you get an interval object returned, don't you? Which is really
date
cool.
Intervals. Yeah, that was one thing I investigating into this was obviously looking at the concept of having an interval, because it's very different to dates. It's not a fixed time, it's just an interval within time that you can compute different times based on timestamps you have, single or more. You can use this interval concept. So yeah, I should say that there's a PHP date time interval, which is great, and then there's also now obviously in Postgres that there's been for a while, but what I just realized, and this is where I love about learning things, is that you learn new things, you're like, oh, that works perfectly, and it's that ha moment. This is a great idea.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. Oh, I'm learning a lot, man.
That's good. And what else is there? So, I mean, Postgres-wise, that's kind of it. That's been really what I've been up to the past couple of, week or so with that. The other one is based on types, actually. And it's an interesting one because Uncle Bob released a new blog post on the 1st of April, and it was Type Wars. 1st of May, the 1st of the 5th. So it was about type wars, and it was a really interesting blog post because it was discussing kind of his experiences using types and throughout the years and his progression, from assembly, which had no typing and things like that, to moving on to something like Fortran and C, and how we've kind of adapted with types and using types in programming languages. And really kind of, I think the kind of, his idea and his motive for it was to kind of say, I feel, who's going to win? Who essentially is going to win? Within the late 2000s, or the late 2000 to 2010, kind of 2005 time with Ruby and things like that, dynamic programming languages seem to be winning, with this idea, of duck typing, and you having a good test suite was enough. People would feel, having a good test suite is a great idea because, it allows us then and feel confident, and we didn't have to worry too much about types. We kind of emphasize more business logic within, and testing in general within a TDD, test suite as opposed to just, kind of relying on a type system. And he was discussing, he was looking at Swift and how strict it was with the types, and whether that, I suppose whether that's a good thing or not, and, who's going to win out, it's always going to be the thing about, the type enthusiasts, dynamic versus static typing and things like that. And I think it goes more into more than that, because I was kind of reading up then again about static typing versus dynamic typing and all that kerfuffle, because it can get confusing. So my kind of idea, so I think of a statically typed language. So a statically typed language to me is something like C and Java, because C and Java require you, before you actually ever initialize a variable, when you declare the variable, you have to specify the type that you're going to give it, and that variable will always be that type. It's almost like you're making a container that you can never change. You're saying, okay, anything that comes in it is going to be of this type. Or be, capable of being this type, essentially, along with, polymorphism and things like that. So that's great. Okay, awesome. But then you get into the frame of like a dynamic language. And so dynamic languages differ in that what they do, essentially, is you say instead, it's like, I can have any type, like the variable is this container that changes through time. And it's only the value itself knows what type it is. There's a really interesting talk, it's considering dynamic typing, which is the value typed. So that's the value of it is actually typed, what you're putting in. So, now, my foo is got a date in it. Oh no, now my foo's got an int in it. As opposed to the variable or reference type, which is, no, this variable has to have a date time in it. And then you've got static type in there. And it doesn't have anything to do with compile time. And that's where it confused me, because I was thinking, statically typed languages, the beauty of it is, you do compile time stuff. And there are actually cases where that isn't the case, where, interpreted languages are statically typed. But they don't have the characteristics of, a compile time phase, like, the pre-compile time phase, which allows you to get those benefits. So, you go from there to statically, and then you go dynamic, and dynamic, has those value types and all that. And, then you get into the weak and strong value typing, and weak and strong typing systems. And in the case of these, this is an even more in-depth topic, because so you've got the idea of dynamic and you've got the idea of static, and whether you want the flex, the kind of, I know that this variable is always going to have this type in it, I know, but as opposed to, I just care about being able to have a script, kind of being able to just say, no, variables are, the value itself is the most important thing. It knows its type. It can just be chucked into any container, any variable. You get into weak and strong. And so essentially what a weak language is something like, so PHP is a dynamic weak language, because it's a weak language in that if I give it a type, such as say a string with a number in it, and I give it an integer and I ask them to add them together, it will coerce the string into an actual, integer. And then it will do its actual thing, or it will try its best to work out from the type. So it's weakly typed in that it doesn't really care like what the types are. It isn't strict on the fact that I can only work with my own type and things like that. It'll be like, yeah, that's cool, fine, whatever. I'll, change that type and coerce it and implicitly do those type of things. Strongly typed is on the other end, and that's like Java. Well, yeah, I suppose, no, it's not really like Java. It's in languages where you can't actually change the type. So things like Python actually like this, where Python, if I try and add a integer and a number of integer together, it would be like, well, no, this doesn't work, because string can only work with adding, other strings. It doesn't make any sense for it to be, being able to add an integer to it. It's completely, crazy talk. The interesting one is C, because C has pointers, and you can essentially, it's weak in that I can actually, even though it's declaring a statically typed variable, I can coerce, I can within that and kind of coerce that, not make a copy of it, but essentially say, actually, no, this isn't really that. And I'm able to change the variable, what it actually means at, kind of runtime, essentially. Or compile time, sorry for that. So yeah, I mean, this is interesting stuff, like talking about types and all that. And I guess my kind of outline on this and looking at this more kind of today is I do see the value in a test suite, absolutely, but I also see the value in good typing as well. And I think the problem we have is that a lot of our languages we use today don't have great type systems, where the type systems are really poor. And maybe kind of sometimes they're verbose and they're restrictive. You think, oh, but in Java I have to do this. And it's like, well, that's just because it's not got, type inference and things like that. As opposed to, things such as, where, okay, I've got a test suite that covers this. But you'll find that some of the tests that you do in a test suite, and there was an interesting blog post I put in, it was from typeinference.com. And it was discussing how, okay, well, you have this idea of a valid number, a probability between 0 and 1. So this is a type essentially, isn't it? Because you can think of probability as a type. A valid type of probability you could think of it as either an integer of 1 to 100, or you can think of it as just a 0 to 1 to 1 float. So you can actually encode, say in languages like Scala, that concept of that type. Now, in a test suite, what you'd have to do is you'd have to employ, with a language that you wouldn't do this kind of typing in, and you wouldn't have this advanced type system. You'd have to do all the type tests for yourself. You'd have to check to make sure it throws if, these types of things and everything. But actually employing that domain, that logic into a type itself gives you the ability to be able to get all the benefits of, using a type system. So, yeah, I mean, that's my rant, really. I mean, what's your kind of opinion on this? Because I thought, you may have like kind of an insight into what you feel like dynamic versus static, and how you feel like a type system. I mean, your uses of type systems, how have they kind of helped you or maybe hindered you?
So really, I guess my first kind of experience, really was when I started learning Java. And so I guess my impulse to learn Java was I always felt like PHP wasn't a language that was really taken that seriously, so I wanted to learn Java. And instantly, that strictness, whilst I might have found it frustrating at first trying to learn, I loved it, really, really loved it. And I could really see the benefits of the confidence you have in your code when another developer works in it, that that they've got to do that, or you're going to throw an exception or what have you. Really like that extra confidence that it gives you. And even now, in PHP, pretty much throughout, obviously, the code base in Laravel, you've got this request type, which has all your get requests, all your input filters, all that kind of stuff. I love that's just bounced around throughout everywhere. And again, it gives you confidence that when that thing is passed into that method, that you can call a method off that request object or what have you. I really, really like that, to be honest with you. I know we have sort of disagreements about it, but for me, I guess it's the extra confidence that it gives you, and the same sort of reason why I like interfaces, because it kind of just enforces a set way of doing something. Whereas if you don't and you just allow anything, then okay, it's nicer, it's a little bit easier, but I don't want to use the word lazy, but if you can see where I'm getting at, it
makes it harder to reason about if the code gets sufficiently bigger. Yeah. And I think that's where type systems come in. But I do feel that we don't have, I think discussing Java's type system probably isn't the best thing, because it's not a great type system. So the value you're getting from that type system is probably just pain. You're getting the pains of not being able to type inference and stuff like that, which isn't dynamic typing. People assume, Scala is able to, it is technically able to do dynamic typing because it has this, special characteristics for that. But typically all it's doing is inferring that that's that type, of a type, and still using a statically typed thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. And I think for me, what you do is you split it out, where a type system is great for the implementation and it allows you to assert certain characteristics. And if you can encode certain logic into types, and you can get into, I started looking into this Iris things and like that languages, and they have amazing and such rich type systems that make you feel like, this is absolutely awesome. And that's why you then get this bug for the type systems, because of the fact that they've got such great type systems. But the trouble is, people then think, but I don't need to have tests for those. And in some cases, if you get pure referentially transparent functions, it makes it very easy for you to kind of reason about these things based on types, and you've broken it up quite really well. But I still believe that you need a good test suite to kind of describe the characteristics of what that business logic is. So it may have the right type, but it could be completely wrong characteristics of what it's meant to do. I've discussed that with, Joe last episode, which was the idea of, I have the correct type, as in like a stack. A stack has characteristics about it that make it a stack, where, if you can encode in the types of those, that's be awesome. But, what you need to do is essentially the stack can abide by an interface where if I pop, I return an item. Maybe it's generic, so it's, you're able to initialize what the stack actually contains, and it's of a certain item. But the characteristics of a stack require that essentially that stack should be one less than what it was before, because you're popping. You have got less items. Now, I think, and you can, in languages like Haskell and in things like Iris, you can program these types and encode that logic in a type, which makes it very powerful, because then, as we say, like in compile time and in these times, you can assert that these characteristics are being maintained. Whereas what you have to do in some cases is then instead, if you don't get that luxury, is you have to encode all that logic and that behavior in test form. But it's the double bookkeeping, entry bookkeeping thing, logic with testing, where it's good to have it in these places. You're doing it once in the code, you're doing it once in the test, to assert it. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like my knowledge of other type systems is probably not great at all. I've looked into Scala, contravariance, covariance, all this fun stuff with type theory and all that, but I don't think I've got a good enough grasp to kind of give a definitive answer. But for me now, personally, I think a bit of both. And I do feel that a good test suite, if you've got a great type system that's not like Java, exactly, and these things, and that allows you to do things like Scala does, where you're like able to be like, oh, it's a double between these values. I mean, that's another type. That's giving you so much power. That's saying it's a type between these values. That's a probability. That's a brand new type for you to be able to use, that you're not having to encode in domain logic within the class, and it's based on the type, of it. So again, I mean, for me personally now, I think you have to have a good test suite, a solid test suite. I didn't agree with his 100% test coverage kind of discussion.
And holy grail.
Well, but
for some people,
this is what I don't understand with test coverage like that, because for me, testing is all about confidence. So if I'm getting the confidence that, my code is working with, say, 50% test coverage because I've got the correct paths that I'm going down and stuff, and I understand, like, you want to, every branch needs to be hit, so that's why you get 100% test coverage. You're getting everything hit. But for me, the tests are also, really about the design. So really, it's whatever you've designed. I mean, that's what TDD is about, is that you have the idea of test-driven, you're designing based on the tests that you write. And, the tests become higher levels. So, like the whole idea where, you only, it's kind of looking at ports and adapters where you're only, it's a black box. You're going into the world. It doesn't matter exactly trying to test the actual details, nitty-gritty, because they can change, and you're just checking what comes out at the end. That's my kind of belief in it all. So for me, I don't believe in that 100% test coverage is the absolute rule, because I've seen test suites that have 100% test coverage, and their tests are awful, and they're so brittle, and their design's so brittle that what happens is that you change one thing, because it's 100% test coverage, you're essentially also documenting both. You're essentially writing it twice. Where I don't believe you should be writing the code twice. Like, I'm having to write the fact that I'm writing it, then I'm having to write code that hits every single thing, so it knows so much about that detail of that, that class. Yeah. It makes you have to tear away the test. Like, the test for me I should be able to rip out some of the implementation and the test fails, obviously, and I'm able to build it up, but maintain the fact that test is still running. I should be able to not have to tweak that test that much. Whereas with this 100% test coverage, you kind of do end up doing that. So, but again, for the audience, it'd be great, to get your feedback and like what you feel about all this test stuff, because testing and typing, stuff, because there's been a lot of debate about it, and it's really interesting topic.
Yeah, definitely. Like you say, I feel like I'm not confident enough to answer that question myself, because I've not used enough languages, but the stuff you're talking about there with like the, like range, two doubles, whatever, sounds incredible. It would be really cool to play with that, I guess.
Just encoding that logic in types makes sense in certain aspects. And the fact that we don't have that in these languages, I mean, it's almost like you can go either route. You have Java, and a lot of people went over and thought, well, screw this, I'll just go over to a dynamic language that, I don't care about types anymore, really, because I can use my test suite. Or what people have done is they go, actually, I really care about types, and I go into even more harder language. So it's interesting. I feel these are very different paths to go down, but I still feel you get the benefits of both. Like, you can have a good type system and then good test suite as well. There's not one or the other.
So with these dynamic type languages, is there a danger that you end up with too many types? Like, I mean, how would you...
Well, no, I mean, so with the dynamically typed language, it's the flexibility of being able to just give it anything, essentially. Like, a variable can be declared, and then you can add something to it. You can change what the value is of that. And you don't have the assertion, and you can't ever be sure exactly what's in that variable, because it could be changed. I mean, within parameters and stuff, obviously type hinting helps a lot with that, because, you're hinting the fact that this function requires this to happen, and it will throw at runtime. But you don't get, obviously, the compile time statistical things. But again, the static things, sorry. But, again, I was under the assumption that if I said static language, it was based on compile time, but actually it's not. And there are languages out there that don't have the compile time, but do have the staticness. Again, along with the weak and strong type. So it's interesting, really interesting type stuff. And that's probably something I would like to more investigate. But at the moment, I'm more on the Postgres train. So there's only certain things you can actually spend time on.
Have you finished with like the type stuff, or you had some other things you were going to say?
I am fully finished, dudes. Anything you want to speak about?
It was only like I completely agree with the points you're making about Screen Hero before. I mean, I don't use it often, but whenever I do, I'm always amazed by how good it is. But you were talking about Slack as well, and one of the things I've been doing really, which you'll probably cringe about, and probably half our listeners will do, but I just found it really useful for me in this current project is I've been using Laravel's exception handler class, and I've just kind of hijacked all those exceptions, and I'm just literally splitting them into a Slack channel, an errors Slack channel. At the minute, just all into the very same channel, but it's just really quite nice having it on a separate sort of screen somewhere else, coming in on a live feed. And it also works really well with, like, when I was saying the other day, like with the API that I've got, where I'm hijacking the status code again, and I'm returning 200 every time because I don't want anything breaking on the client's site if anything goes wrong at my end. So it's really quite nice that I can still do that, and I can still get all my exceptions on a separate screen. That's a really interesting
point, actually, what you make, because like in all aspects of kind of code like this, you think no, you should be returning an error. But if it's something like this where you're going to be essentially trying to sell the fact of no, put this on your site, as you say, you don't want it breaking. You always want it to be valid because you want to log it yourself, but you don't want the client to have to worry about that.
Yeah, that's it. So
I am fully in favour of what you're doing. I think this summarises this podcast. It's the feedback loop. You've now got quicker feedback. I mean, that's essentially it, isn't it? Because you've got the instant feedback of, oh, someone's had an error. Oh, okay, I'll look into that. I mean, you go into this, and what you may end up finding is it becomes unwieldy, and that's when you get analytics and things like that, logging systems in place which allow you to kind of aggregate this data and work out what the most important bugs are and things like that, and how frequent these things are. But no, I mean, in the REPL loop that you've got now with, kind of, I suppose it's, still in development phase, but you're getting people using it every so often. Getting a quick feedback loop like that is really important and really valuable. So no, completely agree with what you're doing.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know if anyone else has got like a similar setup or anything like that. I mean, I know we talked about like the different sort of logging systems and the ones you use where you are and stuff, but a lot of those systems I found quite overkill. So something like that for me is quite simplistic.
Yeah, well,
nice.
Absolutely. I mean, audience, pipe up and let us know. It'd be really interesting to see what you guys pipe up. That sounds really, really aggressive. I don't mean that like that. I mean, just please, let us know what you have, to offer.
Absolutely, but I'm afraid I'm a bit light on material this week. But
not a problem at all. I've been able to somehow yab on for. I seem to have a knack for just talking rubbish.
It's really interesting, actually. Like I say, I mean, the Postgres stuff is really cool, and I've certainly learned a lot about the vacuuming, but the indexing thing would definitely be a good episode to do if you're up for that.
Absolutely,
obviously,
sir.
I'll let you do 100% of that, and I'll just listen. But it would be really interesting.
All right, dude. Well, no, thanks again, man. It's been really cool talking to you, and I know you're very, very busy, just for me, because you're normally not busy for anyone else. No, I'm joking.
You need to finish by saying it's been a great episode. That's kind of your catchline.
This is the note. It's been a great episode.
The best.
Amazing episode. The best episode in the history of episodes.
No point listening to any other podcast.
No point listening to anything. Just don't bother. Just literally, you could just not listen to anything ever again and
whack it on repeat.
Rack it on repeat. Absolutely. And anyway, audience, it's been a great episode. That's my tagline, and we will speak to you again next week. Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
You've been listening to 3 Devs and a Maybe. You can contact us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com or follow us on Twitter at 3 Devs and a Maybe.